My parents disowned me for marrying a poor nurse but years later begged for money after my golden child brother drained their life savings. I, 32M, need to get this off my chest as recent events have made me question everything about my family dynamics. For context, I grew up in an upper middle class family in a wealthy suburb with my parents and younger brother Eric, 27M. We lived in a big house, had nice cars, and were part of the local country club scene. But beneath this perfect exterior, our family dynamic was deeply flawed because of how differently my parents treated Eric and me. From the day Eric was born, he became their entire world. I was 5 at the time, and I still remember how everything shifted. Before Eric, I was their only focus. They took me to parks, read me stories, and seemed genuinely interested in my life. But after his birth, it was like I became background noise in our house. Growing up, the favoritism became more obvious each year. Eric got everything handed to him on a silver platter. When he turned 16, my parents bought him a brand new BMW because he needed to maintain appearances with his friends. When I turned 16 just 5 years earlier, I had to share my mom's old Honda, and even then, I could only use it for school and my part-time job. Speaking of jobs, I started working at 15 at a local grocery store to have some spending money. My parents never gave me an allowance, saying I needed to learn the value of money. Meanwhile, Eric got $500 monthly for socializing because apparently, that was important for his future networking. He never worked a day through high school or college. The disparity in how they treated us was endless. When I needed a laptop for school, I had to save up for months. Eric got the latest MacBook just because he mentioned he might be interested in graphic design. He switched hobbies every few months: golf, photography, music production, and our parents funded each new interest with top-of-the-line equipment that would end up collecting dust in our basement. The real kicker came during college. I got into a good state school for computer science but had to take out student loans because my parents claimed they needed to save for Eric's future. Eric, on the other hand, got a full ride from our parents to an expensive private university, where he switched majors 3 times and took 6 years to graduate with a general studies degree. Despite all this, I focused on building my own path. I worked hard in my classes while doing internships every summer. During my final year, I met Paige, 31F, at a campus coffee shop where she worked part-time while pursuing her nursing degree. She was different from anyone I'd ever met, hardworking, genuine, and completely unpretentious. She grew up in a working-class family, with her dad running a small auto repair shop and her mom working as a waitress. They weren't rich, but they taught her strong values and work ethic. We started dating, and for the first time, I felt truly accepted for who I was. Paige never cared about brand names or status symbols. She was more impressed by my coding projects than my family's country club membership. When I told her about my family dynamics, she listened without judgment but encouraged me to stay true to myself. The trouble started when I brought Paige home to meet my parents. My mom took one look at Paige's modest dress and non-designer handbag and practically turned to ice. During dinner, they kept making subtle jabs about certain people not understanding our way of life. They asked Paige condescending questions about her family's background and seemed almost offended when she spoke proudly about her father's mechanic shop. After Paige left, my parents ambushed me in the study. My mom was practically in tears, saying I was throwing away our family's social standing. My dad started listing daughters of his country club friends who would be more suitable. The worst part was when my mom suggested that Paige was probably just after our family money. I pointed out that Paige had no idea about our family's wealth when we met, and she had her own career goals anyway. They dismissed this, saying she was obviously playing the long game. Things got exponentially worse when Paige and I got engaged 2 years later. By then, I had a good job as a software engineer, and Paige was working as a registered nurse. We had our own apartment and were completely financially independent. But my parents couldn't accept it. They called an emergency family meeting, which was really just an intervention about my poor life choices. Mom cried about how she'd always imagined I'd marry someone from our circle. Dad talked about family legacy and social connections like we were some kind of aristocracy instead of just upper-middle-class suburbanites. Eric, who was living at home despite having graduated, chimed in about how I was disappointing everyone. The final straw came when my dad issued his ultimatum. He said if I married Paige, I would be cut off from all family support and my inheritance. I think he expected this threat to bring me to my senses. Instead, I laughed and told him I hadn't received any family support since high school anyway, and I didn't care about the inheritance. I moved the last of my things out that week. Only my Aunt Jane from my dad's side understood and supported my decision. She later told me she'd always seen how unfairly they treated me compared to Eric. Paige and I got married in a beautiful but modest ceremony. We invited my parents and Eric, but they didn't come. Aunt Jane was there, along with Paige's wonderful family who have treated me more like a son than my own parents ever did. Over the next 5 years, Paige and I built our life together. I worked my way up to senior software engineer while Paige became a nurse practitioner. We bought a nice house in a good neighborhood and have a comfortable life we built entirely on our own. Meanwhile, Eric still lives with our parents at 27. He's had 6 different jobs in the past 3 years, never lasting more than a few months at each. His girlfriend Rachel, who my parents adored because her family belonged to the same country club, recently left him because she got tired of his lack of ambition and responsibility. Yesterday, I got an unexpected call from my parents. For a moment, I thought maybe they were finally going to apologize for everything. Instead, they asked for money. Apparently, supporting Eric's lifestyle and failed attempts at finding himself has drained their retirement savings. Now they need help funding his latest sure-thing business idea. I refused. I told them they made their choice when they picked their precious social status over their son's happiness. They called me heartless and said I was abandoning family. Eric sent me a series of angry texts about how I was being selfish and should help him get his life started. The irony of them asking for money from the son they disowned, to support the son they favored, isn't lost on me. But some extended family members are saying I should help since they're still my parents, no matter what. Ida for refusing to help? Update 1. First, I want to thank everyone for their supportive comments on my original post. I wasn't expecting such an overwhelming response. A lot has happened in the past 2 weeks, and I need to share these developments because things have gotten much worse. After I refused to help my parents financially, they launched what I can only describe as a smear campaign against me. They've been calling every relative and family friend, spinning a tale about how I've abandoned the family and am punishing them for wanting the best for me. Their version conveniently leaves out the years of favoritism and their treatment of Paige. My cousin Mike called to warn me that my parents were telling everyone at the country club that I had become cold and materialistic since marrying Paige. They're painting this ridiculous picture of Paige as some kind of gold digger who turned me against my family, completely ignoring the fact that we've never taken a penny from them and built everything ourselves. The real shock came when my Aunt Jane called me 3 days ago. Since she's still in contact with my parents, though barely, she had some disturbing information about their actual financial situation. It turns out they weren't just asking for startup money for Eric's new business venture, they're in serious financial trouble. According to Jane, my parents mortgaged their house 3 times in the last 3 years to fund Eric's various business ideas. None of these ventures ever got past the planning stage. There was a premium dog food delivery service that failed because Eric never bothered to research health regulations. Then came a cryptocurrency trading platform that turned out to be just Eric losing money on random crypto trades. The latest was some kind of social media app that never made it past a poorly drawn sketch on a napkin. All told, they've sunk over $200,000 into Eric's schemes. Money that was supposed to be their retirement savings. Now they're at risk of losing the house I grew up in because they can't make the mortgage payments. But instead of holding Eric accountable, they're still enabling him and looking for ways to fund his next big idea. What really got to me was a surprise call from Rachel, Eric's ex-girlfriend. We were never close when she was dating Eric, mainly because my parents held her up as an example of the right kind of person I should be associating with instead of Paige. But she reached out because she felt I should know the whole story. Rachel revealed that before their breakup, Eric had borrowed $25,000 from her. He claimed he needed it as startup capital for his latest business idea and promised to pay her back double once it took off. She trusted him because my parents vouched for his business acumen, which is laughable given his track record. Later, she discovered he had spent the entire amount on a luxury vacation with his friends and some expensive gaming equipment. When she confronted him, he dismissed it as market research. After Rachel's call, I did some digging. Eric has apparently borrowed money from several family friends, always with elaborate promises of returns on their investment. My parents covered for him each time, paying people back while telling everyone these were just temporary setbacks in Eric's journey to success. The most infuriating part was learning about what my parents have been telling people about Paige. Through the family grapevine, I heard they've been suggesting that Paige changed me and turned me against the family. They've been telling anyone who'll listen that before Paige, I was such a good son who understood family obligations. The truth is, before Paige, I was just better at hiding my resentment of their treatment. Paige has been incredibly supportive through all this drama. Despite how my parents have treated her, she actually suggested we could help them with a small amount to prevent them from losing their house. She said it would be a one-time thing, just to help them get back on their feet. That's the kind of person she is, willing to help even those who've hurt her. But I refused. Not because we can't afford it, we're doing well financially, but because I know exactly what would happen to that money. It would go straight into another of Eric's schemes, and they'd be back asking for more in a few months. Sometimes being truly helpful means not enabling harmful behavior. My parents must have sensed that their initial tactics weren't working, because now they've switched to having others do their dirty work. Various relatives I haven't heard from in years are suddenly calling and messaging me about family duty and helping parents in their time of need. One uncle even suggested I was being prideful by not helping, saying I should be grateful for the privileged upbringing they gave me. Apparently, he forgot about my student loans. Eric himself has been sending increasingly hostile messages, calling me selfish and accusing me of enjoying watching our parents suffer. He seems to have conveniently forgotten all the years they favored him while I worked for everything I have. Yesterday, my mom sent me a long email about how she always knew Paige would drive a wedge between me and my real family. The irony of her accusing Paige of what she and Dad actually did is not lost on me. I've decided to document everything they say and do, just in case their desperation drives them to do something drastic. Paige suggested we might need to consider legal action if their defamation of her character continues. For now, I'm standing firm in my decision. I won't set myself on fire to keep them warm, especially when they're just going to use that fire to light another one of Eric's get-rich-quick schemes. Update 2. I wasn't planning to post another update, but some shocking revelations have come to light that I need to share. Everything I thought I knew about my family situation just got even more twisted. My cousin David, who works at the local branch of my parents' bank, reached out to me last week. He was clearly uncomfortable sharing this information, but he felt I needed to know. Apparently, Eric had been forging our dad's signature on checks for months. He drained nearly $40,000 from our parents' checking account by writing checks to himself and his friends. When my parents discovered this in June, instead of reporting it or holding Eric accountable, they covered it up to protect his future. David only knew about this because he overheard my parents begging his manager not to report the fraud, promising to pay everything back. They liquidated their remaining investments to cover the forged checks. My dad actually said, "We can't let this one mistake ruin our son's life." One mistake? This was systematic theft over several months. But here's where it gets even worse. Remember how I struggled with student loans through college while they fully funded Eric's education? Well, I discovered through Aunt Jane that my parents had set up college funds for both Eric and me when we were born. Each fund had around $100,000 in it by the time I started college. I never knew about mine because they emptied it completely to fund Eric's first business venture, that ridiculous premium dog food delivery service that never even launched. This information came out during a heated family gathering at my grandparents' house last weekend. I wasn't there, but Aunt Jane was. She finally had enough of hearing my parents play the victims and confronted them about their treatment of me. That's when my mom, probably feeling cornered, blurted out something about how using my college fund was justified because Eric had bigger dreams and needed the capital. Jane was furious. She demanded to know why they let me take out student loans when they had money set aside for my education. Their excuse? According to them, I was already doing well on my own and was more practical about money, so they figured I could handle the loans. Meanwhile, Eric needed the support because he was pursuing bigger things. The truth about my college fund has spread through the family like wildfire. Many relatives who were previously pressuring me to help have now changed their tune. Even my grandparents, who initially sided with my parents and called me ungrateful, have reached out to apologize. My grandfather actually broke down crying when he called me, saying he had no idea they had used my college fund for Eric's failed business. Eric's response to all this? He sent me a rambling email claiming he deserved that money more because he was trying to build something big while I took the safe route with my tech career. The delusion is astounding. Apparently, in his mind, stealing my education fund to fund his failures was somehow justified because he had entrepreneurial spirit. My parents attempted damage control by saying they always intended to pay me back once Eric's business succeeded. They seemed to genuinely believe that some magical future success of Eric's would make everything right. They're still enabling him, still making excuses, still refusing to see how their actions have hurt people. The most recent development is that Rachel, Eric's ex, is considering legal action to recover the money he borrowed from her. When she mentioned this to my parents, they had the audacity to call me, suggesting I could help the family avoid public embarrassment by lending her the money. I blocked their number after that call. Some relatives are still pushing for reconciliation, saying families should stick together through hard times. But these aren't just hard times, this is the result of years of systematic favoritism, enabling, and now actual fraud. The fact that they covered up Eric's forgeries shows they haven't changed at all. They're still protecting him at everyone else's expense. Paige pointed out something interesting. Through all of this, not once have my parents apologized for how they treated us. Every communication has been about what I should do for them, or how I'm failing as a son by not helping. Even after their lies were exposed, they're still trying to guilt me into fixing their problems. I've decided to completely distance myself from this whole situation. I'm not responsible for cleaning up their mess, and I'm done feeling guilty about it. Paige and I are focusing on our own lives and the family we're building together. Update 3. This will be my final update on this situation. Everything came to a spectacular crash last month, and I need to share how it all ended. Eric got arrested. Yes, you read that right. Apparently, after all his failed ventures and burning through our parents' money, he decided to try his hand at actual fraud. He created fake business proposals and documents, claiming to have a successful tech startup, and used these to scam potential investors. He managed to collect about $150,000 before one investor got suspicious and reported him to the authorities. My parents called me crying hysterically at 2 a.m. when Eric was arrested. Instead of acknowledging that he had committed a serious crime, they were more concerned about what people would say when they found out. They begged me to help with his legal fees, saying they needed $50,000 for a good lawyer. When I refused, my mom actually said, "How can you let your brother go to jail when you have the means to help?" I hung up. The family has split into two distinct camps over this. Some, like Aunt Jane and my grandparents, completely support my decision to stay away from this mess. Others still think I should help because he's your brother and prison would ruin his life. These are the same people who didn't say a word when my parents used my college fund to support Eric's failures. The most surprising development was my parents finally admitting they might have made some mistakes in how they handled things over the years. But even this admission came with qualifiers. They said they did what they thought was best for both their sons and that they couldn't have known things would turn out this way. They still don't understand that actively enabling Eric while making me struggle was never doing their best. When they heard through family that Paige and I are expecting our first child, they tried to use it as an opportunity to reconcile. My mom sent a tearful email about wanting to be a grandmother and how she always dreamed of having grandchildren. I responded that they lost the privilege of being grandparents when they chose to support fraud over honesty. The latest update is that Eric is likely facing jail time. The evidence against him is overwhelming, and several victims have come forward. My parents are selling their house to pay off their debts and Eric's legal fees. They made one final attempt to get my help, suggesting we buy their house and let them stay there. They pitched it as a good investment opportunity and a chance to keep the family home in the family. I declined. Paige's parents, in contrast, have been incredibly excited about becoming grandparents. They've been nothing but supportive throughout our relationship, treating me like their own son. The difference between their genuine love and my parents' conditional acceptance couldn't be clearer. The most ironic part? Eric's latest message to me claimed I was living the easy life while he took risks to make something of himself. Apparently, in his mind, working hard, being honest, and building a stable life with my wife was the easy path, while scamming people and living off our parents was the brave choice. I'm done feeling guilty about any of this. Paige and I are focused on preparing for our baby and the life we've built through honest hard work. Sometimes the best thing you can do for family is to let them face the consequences of their actions. I've learned that sharing DNA doesn't obligate you to enable destructive behavior or sacrifice your own family's well-being. My parents made their choices consistently over decades. They chose favoritism over fairness, enabling over accountability, and status over integrity. Now they're living with the consequences of those choices. That's not my burden to bear.